Hi everyone, it's Darlene. Welcome to this week's card. Today I'm doing an emboss resist with a stamp that's not a silhouette. So I'm using my fabulous Florets from Stampin' Up, one of my favorites, and some watercolor paper and some distress markers. So I'm going to first color my stamp with my distress markers. I'm using 3 different colors, and Weathered Wood is the one I'm using right now, and the inside ones are More Mustard and Spice Marmalade. So I'm just going to color here all the way around, and then I'm going to huff on it a little bit to moisten up the ink, and then I'll stamp it right there. And I'm going to do this 3 times, 2 of the big flowers, and then here I am finally doing the small one. The first step, I wanted to kind of blend a little bit more of those 2 yellows, and so I just took my aqua painter and I really just went over it with some water, not too much, just a little bit. And now I'm going to color my petals here, and I'm using the same color I used to stamp them, Weathered Wood, and I'm not putting too much color on there because I really wanted it to be more of a white petal with some shadow. In the first version I did of this card, I did a lot less color, and I think I like it better with a little less color than what I'm applying right here. But what you're going to do is, because it's watercolor paper, it blends really well. So you just take your marker, as you can see right there, and I'm just coloring the edges and where the shadow areas would be. And then I take my aqua painter and I start in the white area and I work my way into the color. And that'll make sure that your white areas that you don't want color on will stay white. If you start your aqua painter in the dark area, then that color is going to spread out a lot further. So you want to start in the white area and move to the color, and I'm just going to do this all the way around my flower. I have a little tissue right there to my left, and I'm using that to wipe off some of the color if I get too much color. So when I feel like I've got too much ink on my brush, I'll just wipe it on the tissue, and then I can start all over fresh from in the white area. Another thing you can do with this tissue, if you kind of mess up on your color, is you just put your tissue directly onto the cardstock when it's still wet, and pretty much all the color will come off and you can start over. Alright, once I've got all those colored, now I'm taking this Versamarker Watermark pen, which is basically your Watermark ink, Versamark, but it's in a pen form. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to color the entire thing. And you want to make sure that you really get good coverage because you don't want any holes. And the reason is because I'm going to do some resist later, and I don't want any of the ink that I'm going to apply on the resist to actually come into my flower. So you got to have like a little bit of a methodology for doing this, and the color, as you can see, doesn't change. It's not going to change the ink color, it's not going to blend it any further, it's just going to go on, which is kind of cool. And so I did kind of a second quick run through of it to make sure I had good coverage, and I did all of my petals first, and then I did the inside because I did notice that a little tiny bit of the yellow is getting into my petals, so I just did all the petals first and then the center. And now I'm embossing it with clear embossing powder. So when I hold it up there, you can see how you get the whole thing covered. So if you don't have a silhouette stamp where you're actually getting ink all over, because here I really don't have ink all over it, some of the Weathered Wood is getting in there through the watercolor, but the Versamark will make sure that you get really good coverage so that the whole thing gets covered with your powder. Okay, so this stem is from the Secret Garden set, and I just prepped my Stamp-A-Majig there. And I'm going to stamp my stems, and the beauty of the resist is that I don't have to worry about masking out my flowers to get the stems behind, because it'll get resisted by the flowers now that I've put that embossing powder on there. So I'm going to stamp stems for each one. I just use a tissue. I find that if you use a baby wipe, it might run a little bit into the watercolor paper because the ink just comes right off, and so it'll start to blend a little bit. So I just used a dry tissue to wipe it up off the flowers. Alright, so I used peeled paint on the outline, and now I'm coloring it in with Shabby Shutters. And distress inks are wet, so I don't really need to use my Versamarker here because I'm going to emboss these. The distress inks stay wet for a certain period of time so that you can emboss right on top of them. So I just sprinkled my powder and embossed it. Now I've got my broken china, which I'm using my ink applicator to apply, and then the flowers are going to be resisted because they have embossing powder on them. And for those of you who have trouble getting those square marks from the applicator when you're doing this ink blending technique, you should try it on watercolor paper because it is so much easier. The ink just blends right in and you don't get hardly any marks at all. And I'll have a link to my watercolor paper on my blog. Alright, so I'm taking some water and I'm going to spray it into my hand, and then I'm going to flick it onto my paper. Now what I'm going to do is take a tissue and just wipe it up, or dab it, I guess, and the ink just comes right off. It's really cool. It works really quickly. And so you can see immediately what your results are going to be. Here, I slowed it down a little bit so you can see how this is turning out. Okay, now I'm going to start working on my background. I have this herringbone stamp by Impression Obsession, which is a great subtle background stamp. If you want to purchase this, I'll have a link on my blog. And I'm just going to apply this directly to my folded cardstock. So this is my card base. And I usually apply my background stamps upside down so that I can get good coverage by pressing down with my hand. And so now that I've got that covered, I'm going to work on the flower panel, which I'm going to adhere to just a piece of plain black cardstock with about 1/4 of an inch of a mat there. And I just had some overlap, so I trimmed it off with scissors. This is a new stamp set by Stampin' Up! Called Label Love, and it has a matching punch. And I used Memento ink first, and you'll see how this came out. And I think I just need a re-inker, but it came out a little bit gray, so I went ahead and used my VersaFine Black Onyx, I think it is, and you can see the difference. The VersaFine stays wet for a longer period of time, which is why I have to dry it here, but it's more of a sticky ink, and so I feel like I get a really good coverage with black especially, and it works great on clear stamps as well. Anyway, so there's the matching punch for that, and I trimmed it down a little bit because I didn't want it to be too big. And now I'm going to stick it there at the bottom. I'm going to punch some holes with a 1/16 inch hole punch, and I'm going to take some embroidery thread and just run it through. I find that 1/16 hole is perfect for embroidery thread. I'm going to adhere it with some dimensionals to pop it up. And then I'm just going to wrap it around. I'm going to add a bow. Rather than trying to tie this long piece, I just sort of fake the bow. So I have one piece that goes straight across. Trim off the end there. And then I'll just make a bow separately and just glue it on there. So here I am making the bow, which for some reason today took me longer than usual, so I just edited that part out. So here we have the bow, and I take a glue dot and I ball it up in between my fingers, and I just put it right there where I need it, and then press the bow on it, and it's not coming off. And that's it. So something a little bit different today. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you next week. Thanks for watching.